Why are you running for a state board of education, and what qualifications do you think that you bring?
The story goes back a number of years. In '92, I had been praying and offered my services as a parent to the Kearney Public Schools and called and said, is there a way I can help? And they said that we're starting a curriculum committee for the health curriculum. Would you like to be on that committee as a parent representative? And I said, yes, I'd like to do that. I joined that committee, and it was an interesting adventure because where they were headed and where I thought they should be headed were two different places. They were wanting to do comprehensive sex education, and they even sent many from the committee to a Department of Education training for that kind of thing. And when I got there, and I just was appalled at some of the things that were being presented at that time. It has gotten more extensive, their comprehensive sex education and gender stuff. And I just don't see that as where we in western Nebraska are wanting to be.
And so where do you stand on the proposed health education standards that have been indefinitely postponed?
Postponed. Well, as far as I'm concerned, they can be permanently postponed. They aren't mandated by any laws. That right now, each district has their own standards, and they seem to be doing fine with those. And I think they should just continue at that rate. The local people need to be able to have their standards included in their curriculum, and I think that would be best.
And so if elected, what would you like to see done with these standards?
Permanently removed. I mean, there's no need for them.
Perfect. And so what do you feel is age appropriate health education standards?
Age appropriate, there's just some things that legally you don't do to children. Materials and books and videos and things that are against the law, and there's a reason for those. So age appropriate needs to maintain that. Part of it is the standards of the local community, and the local people need to be a part of the decisions in that. The local teachers as well as the local parents and others. So there are some differences in different communities. However, there are some laws against some things that need to be maintained.
And so what efforts would you take to protect students from materials that are not sexually appropriate?
Well, that's where the vigilance of the community and the constituents needs to be a part of it, the local control. Because from where I would sit on the board, it's limited about what I can do. I can help remove things from the recommended items that come from the State Board of Education, but it still comes down to the local people being involved and having the possibility of seeing what the curricula or whatever is in their community, in their library, and so on.
And so, as the debate over the proposed health education standards showed, many parents and community members felt that the State Board of Education is not listening to them or their concerns. If you were elected, how would you work to listen to these individuals and address their concerns?
I've been listening throughout the campaign. I've got friends that are teachers and work with the government, and I'm constantly listening. I've been some of those that have felt not listened to.
And so how would you define critical race theory, and is it being taught in Nebraska public schools?
Critical race theory is an offshoot from critical theory, which is a Marxist idea. The object is to have the oppressed over here and the oppressor over here and pit them against each other until whoever is leading the oppressed becomes one of the leaders that becomes an oppressor, basically. So it's not a positive thing. And they're just using race at this point as one of the issues to be divisive and create more difficulty.
And do you think it's being taught in Nebraska public schools currently?
Well, it's kind of like I was looking up at the New England Primer. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it goes way back, and it's before a country was even formed as a country. And most of the schools were teaching from the New England Primer, and I just happen to have a copy of learning the ABCs. A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. In B, thy life to mend, this book attend, and this book being the Bible. So it's not a Bible class, it's a reading class and learning how to read, but there's something that's interjected in all parts of the New England Primer, and it has to do with Christ and the Bible. Are there things that are being interjected into the curriculum here in Nebraska? I'm convinced there are other things that right now are ungodly that are being interjected, and that's one of them.
And so, do you support banning certain books in school?
Again, it's down to the legal definition of what materials are appropriate for children. And there are some at the school board in March. There were a couple of books, 2 or 3, that were read from that were obscene and graphic, and they don't belong where our children are.
And do you have recollection of the titles of those books?
I don't have those.
And what sort of material do you think should be banned?
Well, banned, it isn't banned, it's illegal. Illegal materials should be illegal, and they should not be in where our children are for libraries or other materials.
And so what would be the terms of illegal material in your definition?
My definition doesn't matter. It's actually the legal definition of sexually explicit material and age appropriate, and it does involve the standards of the community.
And so what should be the proper channel for banning questionable books?
Well, it should go through the legal system.
And who should make the decisions to ban certain books? Do you think it should be the Board of Education?
Again, it's a legal definition that we're working with, and it, as far as banning books, that word is a buzzword, but the idea is that there are things that are just not appropriate for children, and the process, well, the community needs to be a part of that process, and so there should be vigilant parents and grandparents and others that are pointing out that these materials are obscene and illegal.
And so what specific plans do you have to recruit and retain teachers in Nebraska?
Well, if I could snap my finger and make it all happen, a lot of things, that is such a big deal as far as complexity. I think of several different conversations as I listened with administrators recently as they talked about that very problem, and they talked about the funding. They talked about, in rural Nebraska in District 7, they talked about child care for teachers. They talked about housing for teachers. So, can I fix those problems? I don't think that's something I can do, but those are serious issues. And then there's the issue, my own son, when he was student teaching, was challenged because there was a student that he had that turned in a paper, and he knew that the paper was directly off the internet, that it was completely copied, and he tried to hold the student accountable, and he was reprimanded by his administration for trying to hold her accountable because she was a student of color. And okay, if his job is to teach, are we teaching people to cheat off the internet, or are we teaching people how to have skills for life? And it's a complex issue. What can I specifically do? I can try to help teachers be able to have some control in the classroom, but again, that's local administration and local things that hopefully we can not have coming down from above, but can deal with on in a day-by-day basis. I know years ago we had a foster daughter, and there was such a difference in her when she came from a place of no rules and no restrictions, and she lived in our home where there was structure, and her test scores improved tremendously because she was living with structure. And those are things, how can I as a state board member help create more structure? There is such a complex issue. I'd love to help create more structure, and I did in one child's life, as well as my own two sons, but wow.
And how would you address the issue of teacher burnout among teachers if elected to the Board of Education?
Again, I'd love to be able to snap my finger and make that happen. At the local restaurant, they can close the dining room and then just do service out the window, but you can't do that in the schools. And so the teachers are getting overworked, and then there's fewer of them, and then it just makes it worse and worse all the time. To let them teach, that was one group that I talked to. I asked them what would help to let the teachers teach instead of having all the mandates that they have to work with all the time. I'd love to drop some of those mandates and just let them teach with the kids.
And so the COVID-19 pandemic, put a strain on Nebraska students in terms of learning loss and mental strains. So what specific things would you do as Board of Education member to address this issue?
Snap my finger and make it all go away. No, it's my wife's a counselor, and she has lots of customers, clients because of COVID. It seems like there's been an increase for her. There is a need for that kind of mental health care, and again, it's such a complex issue. I'd like to be able to help in any way that makes sense as we look at procedures and processes from the state board to help the teachers and the administrators.
And would that mean maybe adding more counselors and teachers to those students that need it?
It could possibly mean that. There just are so many areas that need explored on that, yeah.
And so what do you feel the balance should be between the State Board of Education and local school boards?
Well, again, I think it should be fewer and fewer mandates from the state board and from the State Department of Ed and from the federal Department of Education. And as much as possible, that leaves the local school boards to do their work, and it also leaves the local patrons to help make sure that the local school boards are doing theirs. But the Department of Education, the State Board of Education, should be there to assist in any way that they can that's appropriate.
And so when you look at test scores, some school districts and schools have some students that are not proficient at certain standards. If elected, what would you do to ensure that students can meet those proficiency standards?
Oh, if I could ensure something, that would be wonderful. Again, it goes back to, and I'm convinced when our foster daughter was here and she had structure, her proficiency increased, I don't know how many fold, but it was huge, the difference that that made. Is there an appropriate structure and discipline and holding accountable that's going on that the local schools are able to do without government mandates saying you can't do that and you can't do that and you can't do that? But to have a good solid structure that includes enough discipline that they can work on the actual materials and curricula instead of what teacher wants to be told off. Those are things that part of that education, that stuff that permeates the education right now has taken those chances away from the teachers, and that's part of why they're leaving, and as from what I'm hearing.
And so, do you feel there needs to be changes made to state testing to maybe help those students that aren't proficient?
Oh, they're constantly changing that, and I know that the teachers are trying to teach to the tests in so many cases, and that's the testing that I think about is the testing that is for the teachers to be able to become teachers. And I think we need to reevaluate how that works within Nebraska, like the praxis test that is so difficult for the future teachers to be able to get through. Are there other ways of holding the standards high for future teachers and still helping them make sure that that happens? But as far as the students and the idea of what comes to mind, dumbing down the tests, that's not the answer, in my opinion. What can we do to help them? I think we help the teachers be able to teach the curriculum.
And so what actions do you feel need to be taken for schools and districts whose students are continually not proficient at those standards?
Again, it gets back to my foster daughter story, the idea of having a good solid structure and holding the students accountable and expecting a high amount of high level from them so that they expect it from themselves.
And when you say structure, does one specific structure for one child look the same for every child?
Oh, of course not. Because each child works from a different perspective. As you know, what's a reward for one would be a punishment for somebody else, for somebody that's on their own and likes to be on their own. To say that you have to be off in the corner by yourself for a while, that's great, but for somebody else that's a people person, that's totally different. So it has to, and that's what the teachers need to be able to do with the individual students. So the structure needs to flow with the student.
And so do test scores really matter, or do we need to be looking at the bigger picture of what students are facing, like homelessness, hunger, lack of parental support?
Oh, those three issues you mentioned are huge. And what kid is going to learn if they're hungry or if they just witnessed a parent doing something to another parent or those things. Those are going to be difficult situations no matter what. Do tests matter? Do test results matter? Yeah, they do. But again, we need to deal with each individual student in what's going on and try to bring out the best in them for sure, even in difficult situations. How much can the school do to really help social needs in the families, there has to be a limit. It can't be the school running the family. But again, how can the schools help the families and not take over, but assist in any way possible? There's still going to be difficult situations, even with good assistance.
And if elected, how would you work to expand early childhood opportunities for students, especially in rural schools?
Oh, I have mixed feelings about early childhood because the programs that I see, I have a lot of caution about, because there's some things coming down from the federal on those that seem to be an indoctrination. So I'm cautious about it. I know that the first 2 years of childhood are huge, and if they grow up those first 2 years in a loving situation and a caring situation, that makes a huge difference for the rest of their life. And so to help them grow in early childhood, how can that be done without political indoctrination? That's the rub on that, is it needs to be done, but not moving people into a political stance of some sort, even at that young age.
And how would you, as State Board of Education member, work to ensure all Nebraska students are college and career ready once they graduate from high school?
Oh, again, it gets down to some of that structure and helping them know. I know I have a son that worked with so many that were coming through the system, and all they knew was to play with their phones, and they didn't know how to interact with people, and they didn't know how to do a job, and they may get it explained one day, and then the next day they need it explained over. How do we avoid that? Again, there needs to be structure and accountability within the education system as much as possible, so that those students realize the importance of growing up knowing how to work. When I visit the ranch people out in District 7, it's fun to see what a difference there is. Even people that are working at the grocery store, young people, or at a fast food, they're so much more attentive because they grew up knowing that they needed to work, and that was what you did. And in the smaller rural communities, that is one thing that's learned a lot, and it's harder for some people to understand that when they didn't grow up knowing that there were a lot of expectations and responsibilities that come with that. And how do we help them know that they have responsibilities? We hold them accountable and make them responsible, instead of saying, oh, if you get your papers in on the last day of the semester, then you're all okay. There needs to be working with people who are in situations and maybe late for this or that, but there also needs to be holding people accountable.
And are there any specific initiatives that you would like to implement or continue to address the current issue or the previous question I mentioned? Is there any specifics?
Okay, remind me.
So are there any specific initiatives that you would like to implement to ensure that Nebraska students are college ready? Like maybe programs or?
Oh, okay. The college ready, I know that like our local school system, they're doing different things to try to help. And again, it needs to be directed by the community, because different situations, and it's going to be different in Sydney than it is going to be in Holdridge, and it's going to be different in Imperial and other small towns, or Oxford. They need to be able to work within the systems and within together. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries.
I'll shut this off.
Okay. So would you like to see the State Board of Education expand dual credit course opportunities?
If I understand that right, that would mean getting credits in high school and college at the same time. And that just makes sense if it's possible, if it's appropriate.
And if elected, how would you work to create workforce partnerships for kids who may not want to attend college?
I went to tech school and I learned a lot there and learned skills. What can I do personally? I can't I can't make them want to do that, but I think as much as possible, again, it's the local community, the local teachers and administrators that are going to need to cooperate within those in the area, businesses and so on. I would love to help that happen, but from the state board position, I'm not sure how much hands-on I'm going to get.
And so what would you do to encourage Nebraska high school students to return to their hometowns to work and raise a family, specifically in rural Nebraska?
Oh, they need to have businesses and business opportunities for that to happen. And so that's a societal thing of understanding how important local businesses are in the smaller communities especially. And again, that's a tricky thing. I'd love to be able to do that, but it's going to take local communities interacting with the schools for that to happen.
And my last question is, what's the message that you would send to someone that's unsure of voting for you? Why should people vote for you?
Well, I've been at this for a while, since early 90s. After my experience on that state board of ed, or on that curriculum committee, I did run for State Board of Education in 1994. I barely missed getting on. I went ahead and started with other parents. We started together Faith Christian School, of Kearney, which now has 117 students. And I went on to become a pastor then, and then also became an interim pastor that went into churches. I did 3 churches and felt the calling to go in. It's after the church has the meeting where things blow up and the pastor is gone, and then the intentional interim, which is the job that I had, comes into the church, helps to settle things in, helps to figure out what systems were working, what systems weren't working, and what needs to happen, tries to help everyone cooperate, join together, and find the vision that God has for them in that church, and then move forward and help them find a new pastor that shares that vision. The reason I think I'd be good on the state board is there's some systems right now in both the board and in the Department of Education that aren't working. There's many that are, and there's certainly some turmoil, and people aren't always talking with each other. And I can be a calm voice and a calm mind in the midst of all that to help move people towards common ground and towards a positive direction. And in the end, that will help the students of Nebraska, the teachers of Nebraska, the administrators of Nebraska, to provide some of the best education in the world, if possible. But there's some things that need some work. And I'm the kind of guy that works behind the scenes to get that done. And I would like that opportunity. And that's why I think people should vote for me.